Hey everybody, it's Steph with Killer Sites and other sites. So in this vlog, I'm going to answer a question that was put to me recently. Do you build static sites or sites based on a CMS, a content management system? So just in case you don't know, a content management system is an app like WordPress, Drupal, Joomla. These are pieces of software that you install on a web server and they help with content management. You can post articles and upload images and do all kinds of other stuff, set categories, etc., 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 etc. So to give you some context, CMSs are used quite a bit in websites today. As much as 35% of the world's websites are powered by some sort of CMS. And that's a rough figure. It could be a bit more actually. So the big king of it all, of course, is WordPress. WordPress powers something like 27%, 25% of the world's websites. Just WordPress. So that's significant to consider. So the larger question is, well, I'm just going to read the question. When you build for a client, do you use a specific CMS or do you build static sites? He goes on, this guy, to say, I've been trying to gather a consensus on the best approach for designing sites for clients, and, well, everyone seems to have a different opinion on the subject. I'm interested to know your opinion. So what I said was that, well, as I just opened up, so many sites are based on Joomla, Drupal, and especially WordPress. And there's a reason for it, because they bring a lot to the table. They bring a lot of bonus functionality, a lot of free functionality to a website. Now, I believe the days of static websites, what do I mean by static websites? Websites that are just HTML, CSS, maybe a little bit of JavaScript here and there, and they're not connected to any database, they're not part of a content management system, just a traditional type of website. I think that business of building traditional websites is going to become more and more difficult in terms of making a living as a freelancer. And there's a couple of reasons for that. Number one, a lot of small business owners, which are 80% of the businesses, are, if they just want a static website, because they're not design trained, the vast majority of them, because they don't have the eyes to see the difference between a great looking design from scratch versus some template or versus a website builder like a Wix or something. If you come to a client with just the ability to build static websites, you're going to be severely limiting your job prospects, your gig prospects. So I would strongly suggest that you do pick a particular content management system and you learn it, and you learn to skin them, basically add the templates and modify them and work with them. There's a big business in that, and many years ago, I don't know what it was, maybe 2008, something like this, 2006, I'm not sure when, I coined the term, I don't know, maybe somebody else came up with this term before me, but I came up with the idea of the WordPress web designer. And this whole idea back then, I said, well, there's going to be a huge business opportunity for web developers, web designers who just work with WordPress. And in fact, that is the case, and some people have made a lot of money doing that. You know, custom WordPress templates, building WordPress plugins, and providing that expertise. You would be surprised how many small businesses are driven on WordPress. So I know a lot of developer types, a lot of designer types are going, oh no, WordPress. And I'm one to complain about WordPress, but it's the reality of the situation. So to work with WordPress, of course, you need to know your HTML, HTML5, your CSS3, and a little bit of JavaScript. But it's also good to know a little bit of PHP because WordPress is created with PHP. So if you want to go a little deeper in terms of your WordPress skills, in terms of the services that you provide for WordPress, if you know PHP, it's just going to make your life that much easier. On top of that, I want to bring up a wider issue, the idea of the web designer versus the web developer. Now, web designer to me is a throwback term. It's a profession that has reference to the 90s, early 2000s maybe. I know a lot of people still think about web design. They talk about web design. I think a better way of describing the modern day web designer, if you will, is you would describe them as a front-end developer versus the back-end developer. So the back-end developer is the person writing the PHP or the Django, Python, or the Java, or the Ruby, the person building the apps behind the scenes, the engine of dynamic websites. Now, the front-end web developer is the person who's building the user interface, the UI, the visual components of a website, of a web app. And so that's what I would really call the modern day web designer. I would really call them front-end developers or front-end web developers, because they're really there's much more about code with modern day web design. There's much more about user experience, UX, than there was in the past. You see, back in the day, if you built a nice looking site, maybe add some search engine friendliness to it. We call this SEO, basically making sure that your code is optimized for search engines. Of course, these days, if you do proper web development, you write your code properly for your websites, you don't need to make your code compatible with the search engines. It's already compatible with the search engines for two reasons. A, the code is better. B, everybody codes better rather. And B, the search engines are better at what they do. So in the old days, it was much more about aesthetics, how good it looked. These days, if you're developing websites, you really are a front-end web developer, because you have to not only understand that it looks good, you have to make it look good, you have to make it work good. So that's where user experience comes in, UX. And then you're probably going to have some sort of knowledge about how to structure your code so it works with back-end coders. So you need to really understand code, and to even make full use of HTML5 and CSS3 these days, you have to know a little bit of JavaScript programming, because a lot of the power in HTML5 and CSS3, not all of it, but a lot of it comes unlocked when you understand a little bit of JavaScript. If you want to get it, you're going to need to learn a little bit of jQuery as well. You don't have to be a master at it, but jQuery, you could fudge through without knowing JavaScript. But if you know just the basics of JavaScript, your ability to use jQuery will be, you'll be 10 times more productive. So yeah, and there's other frameworks, Bootstrap and so on. So these days, modern day web design has much more to do with front-end web development rather than design. So I think the days of the pure designer, somebody who develops the user interface for a website or a web app just so that it looks good, I think those jobs are fading, simply because the web is much more sophisticated, websites are much more sophisticated, so you as a developer have to be much more sophisticated. Let me give you context and a story. Back in the 90s, what we had to do in terms of coding in a website was totally different than today. The average web designer in the mid-90s, a lot of them didn't know anything about code. A lot of them were graphic designers who moonlighted as web designers, and they would use a product like Go Live or Dreamweaver or something, or Front Page, and they would just slice up their Photoshop images where they would lay out their sites in Photoshop, and that was it. So web design has really changed quite a bit. It got much more sophisticated. And so in the year 2000, 2001, when the web standards movement took place, where everybody started thinking smart about code, about writing good code, good HTML and CSS code, at the time in the late 90s, early 2000s, all about XHTML, which is just, anyway, forget about XHTML. We don't do that anymore. But the point is that the game changed. The game of what a web designer did changed. It went from being what it was in mid-90s to what it became in early 2000s. So now we're in 2016. It's unbelievable how time flies. The game has changed again in the last 5 years or so. So, give or take a year. So yes, bottom line, should you just do static sites? Well, if you're a really good designer, you might be able to scrape together a living. But I'm telling you, the business and the action is with using some sort of content management system. And these days, because of its popularity, WordPress is probably your best bet. I'm not saying WordPress is the best on a technical level. I'm just saying it is the most popular, and it's so many companies use it. It's well worth your time and your money to learn WordPress and to work with it. And yes, it can be a pain. Trust me, I know. All right, I hope you found this useful. Ciao, ciao.